to the Breakfast Leadership Show, where we interview global thought leaders on business, leadership, and life. Here's your host, keynote speaker, best-selling author, and chief burnout officer of the Breakfast Leadership Network, Michael Levitt.
Welcome back. I've got Dianna Anderson online. Dianna, how are you today?
I'm great, Michael. Thank you.
Really looking forward to this conversation. We talked a little bit in the pre-show about the importance of having those difficult conversations that we as a society seem to be avoiding. So why don't you share a little bit about you and then we'll jump into the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So, just to put context around what I'm going to share, I began my career in large scale change management back in the early 90s, doing re engineering. So, really making big changes happen. And then transitioned into coaching in 1994, actually, when coaching was just getting started. And I opened my coaching practice in 95 and started working with people and discovered that I was just coaching everybody to take a coaching approach to their day to day challenges. And what I also noticed was that when people could talk with each other about things, that they were able to resolve issues. And so it kind of made my head explode because it helped me understand that this ability to just have conversations with each other were fundamental human skills that we lacked. And that's what inspired me to shift my company, Cilliant, into training people how to have in the moment coaching conversations using a really simple approach we created called Untying the Knot. And so that's what we do now. Untying the Knot is being used around the world to help people have better conversations.
It's so desperately needed. I think people, when they have their conversations with each other, they're seeking to basically share their opinion, but when they're listening, they're not necessarily wanting to understand what the other party is saying, and there's this gap or in the bridge that has
Hmm.
been just depending on the sector and depending on the situation, seems to be getting bigger and bigger. And when we went through the pandemic, and I've said this before, I was mistakenly optimistic that one, people would slow down a little bit and really focus on what's important, and that did happen in many cases. I think a lot of people took a long, hard look at what they were doing in their careers and their personal lives and all of that, and they did make some adjustments, some small and some big, where they determined, you know what, I want to live my life differently than I have, and they made the choices to do so. But I think a lot of people ended up reverting back to how we were doing things, but then it just started becoming worse. Even the conversation around working remotely or working in the office full time, those conversations have been interesting to observe, to say the least. I think in many cases, not everybody's at the table having those conversations. I think the organizations have been deciding this is what we're going to do without actually seeking the advice or guidance from the team and asking them, okay, what's important to you? Because everyone kind of thinks in many cases is a blanket statement when it comes to remote work, and that people are like, no, everybody just wants to work remotely. I know a lot of people that cannot stand working remotely. They just despise it, and they're not in management, they're an employee, they want to go in. And there are some people that would be absolutely ecstatic if they never saw an office chair again. And they just don't want to do it. And they're both those individuals that I'm thinking of are extremely productive at what they do. They are, highly valued employees in the organizations they're with, continue to perform above and beyond. But in many cases, I think the communication issues that we continue to have again, the problem just seems to be getting worse instead of better. And um, anybody that's ever tried to untie some knots, to paraphrase, what your tool, I think these knots have knots in them, and it just seems to be even more challenging than we've ever seen. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, you've captured a lot of ideas in there. I think one of the things I'd highlight is this idea that coming out of the pandemic, the world was profoundly changed. And our need to have conversation about how we want to adapt to that change is absolutely essential. And the way you're describing conversations that are happening right now and with regard to knots is kind of like what I would say problem solving, like treating people like problems to be solved. And when we go into this sort of dueling of who's right and who's wrong, it actually tightens the knots. So knots are things that are not happening. And when we argue about who's right or who's wrong, we make them tighter and stronger and more difficult to untie. And so in this time of profound change, and let's face it, I was looking at the amount of change that or um, I think what was strategic issues that senior leaders had to deal with, and the before the pandemic was something like, 9 or 10, and now it's like 14 or 15. I mean, just exponentially more challenging. And so what that means is we have got to be able to have better conversations about where we're going, what matters, just to your point, how are we going to get there? And all of that requires us being able to appreciate how other people see situations, to be able to tap into their insights and knowledge, and to be able to bring those together in a unified way to point ourselves in a better direction. And those are just skills we frankly lack. Those are things we didn't have to do too much. Before well, certainly did before the pandemic, but so many of our leadership skills are actually really anchored in the last century, and we haven't updated them to meet the needs of the current one. Um, and I think it reflects in the challenges that we're having.
Yeah, I've said this on my show a lot, and I'm originally from Detroit, and I always frame it. I'm about to do something that could be construed as being blasphemy, but we need to retire Henry Ford and how we work. And a lot of the work that we do is kind of birthed out of the industrial age and applied in an office setting. And and I love what you said, in the last century, we haven't evolved from that very much. And toss in the fact we've got so many different generations in the workforce now, and Gen Alpha is not far behind. I think they're maybe 3 or 4 years away from starting to enter the workforce. Uh, it, my hunch is, there's still going to be a lot of baby boomer, where there should be, baby boomer aged individuals will still be working. So you've got all of
Mhm.
those generations from that generation to Gen Alpha all working together. And communication is crucial. And there's so many assumptions that are being made and an unwillingness by all parties. I'm Gen X, so I'm pointing the figure in every direction. It's like we all need to figure out how to harmoniously work together to leverage our strengths, leverage our interest, understand better each other, spend more time with ourselves, to get a better understanding of who we are as individuals. There's so many of us that have no clue who we are.
Mhm.
And I run into that a lot, especially when, helping organizations or people with burnout recovery, just figuring out, okay, how did it come to this? And they they can't communicate. They may know, but they're having trouble communicating it because they're holding back, or maybe they're embarrassed, could be their ego, could be a lot of different things. But
Mhm.
we have an opportunity here, and that's how I look at things. We have an opportunity here to redesign work in a way where we all can operate in a much better frame of mind, space, opportunities where we're allowed to be creative, throughout the organization from top to bottom, and create some absolutely amazing products and services because as a society, we want those. I want the best stuff. That's why I don't like seeing people burn out. I don't like seeing organizations struggle because that means they're not doing the things that I would love for them to do because there's a reason why they're there. There's a reason why that company exists. And I want organizations to thrive and grow because society benefits from it. But we all seem stuck at the starting line, or even we may not even be at the starting line
Mm.
to run this race of work and life and harmonizing all of that so we get the benefits of everything besides just getting a paycheck. I think people deep down enjoy the ability to work and create and do things. But there's so many different things that are thrown at us, both internally from our thoughts and perceptions, and also externally from the thoughts and perceptions of others. And it just has made for some really challenging times for so many organizations and individuals. And that's why we see it in the numbers with, the Gardner studies of all the people that are disengaged at work and, the turnover and retention problems that so many companies have. And you look at it and you go, okay, well, what is it? And
Mm.
it's communication. And that's the overarching umbrella to it. Obviously, underneath the umbrella is all the work that you do to flush things out and, literally untie the knots there. Because those knots are just have been getting tighter and tighter and tighter instead of, a lot of times just simplifying some things. And I know, and I love your thoughts on this. It just seems like a lot of organizations and individuals just overcomplicate matters in areas they really don't need to. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
You know, um, I agree. The world has become much more complex, and it's harder and harder for people to really bring the very best that they have to offer into these work environments because they're just so there's so much change coming at us. And the simplest way I can explain what is going on is to go back and look as at um, what the change looked like back in the last century when it was actually pretty simple. Life was simple. It made sense to tell people what to do. The kind of leadership that we had then aligned well with the context of a very slow world, not a hyper-connected world. So that leadership style made sense. But what we've done is brought a lot of our beliefs about leadership from that time, and now we're trying to apply them in a very different world. The world we find ourselves in is what we would call complex, which means, and the simplest definition of complexity that I've ever seen is there are so many inputs, we can no longer determine what the output is going to be. And when that happens, I think there's a fundamental change that occurs that a lot of people haven't noticed, which is we used to be changing things. Like back in the last century, we were doing, uh, production lines and, re-engineering and all those things. But if you look at change now, it really happens through people. I don't care whether you're looking at AI and how to monetize it or, how to make sense of our new terrorist world and changing relationships and how you're going to source things there. The problems have become much more complex, and resolving them requires us to be able to have really meaningful, productive conversations with each other in the flow of work that are honoring enough for us to imagine new things. Because we will not find any of the answers to these challenging uh, issues in the past. They all, to your point, it's all creativity. We need to create spaces where, as you are pointing out, people can work in a more creative way, come up with new things, new ideas, new ways of doing things. And we're only going to get that if we realign leadership to honor the complexities of these times, which means enabling people to be able to work together more effectively, which means equipping them to have really good conversations.
It's the classic example of many managers, and not necessarily their fault, but they're responsible for um, learning how to be a manager and a leader. And too often, organizations don't spend the time to bring in, you know, amazing people like yourself to help them become a better listener, a better manager, a better leader. They're really good at what they do. They get promoted. Congratulations, you're the manager of the department now.
Mhm.
You've never managed a person in your life. Now you're responsible for all the work that's supposed to be done by you, but then also all the work that you're supposed to be doing or your team is supposed to be doing, and you don't have any skills on that. And all of a sudden, you feel like you're the only person on this island and you're responsible for this island surviving, and you don't have any tools to do so. And it's not a fun feeling for those people, and they react in a variety of different ways, typically not positively. Uh, and they end up being, you know, pardon my French, a hard ass because they're scared, or they're afraid their ego is going to get hurt. There's just all kinds of emotions and feelings going on instead of going, okay, I need some help on this. And if the ownership, the organization, you know, won't allocate the resources for it, then it behooves that manager, if they want to continue to be a manager in their career, if that's their vocation to continue to rise up through the ranks, to go out and learn how to do it. And there's no shortage of ways to find out about information. We're YouTube University kids. There's all kinds of things there now that you could learn the wrong things. You say, you know what, I'm gonna, this is a nonprofit. There's a lot of people that are just heart and soul people. They love each other. They're caring. Just saying, I wouldn't recommend Jack Welch's way of running things. That may not work there. Not saying it won't work anywhere. It did. GE did what they did. You can argue for or against and all of that, but I wouldn't use that approach. Try go at it, like a buffet style, and just go. I'm gonna take a little of this and figure out your own leadership style. Figure out who you are, and I think a key component of that is just communicating.
Yeah.
And I remember, I took over a very toxic workplace many, many years ago. It was a healthcare organization, and they had horrible turnover. Master's level clinicians were quitting like in mass. So it's just a cesspool, and was able to turn it around in a pretty short period of time. And without using, again, a Jack Welch term, didn't really dehire a whole lot of people, couple, but not even the majority of them. And one of the things I did is I just went in there and I said, okay, what kind of leader do you need me to be? What do you need from me?
Sure.
And, a lot of people said, well, that makes you vulnerable. It's like, well, in life, you're vulnerable. No one escapes life, apparently. That's what I've been told. None of us get out of here alive. But in the meantime, you can create an environment where people feel like, okay, well, this is what I need. Uh,
Yeah.
and you just you ask them, human to human, okay, how are things going? You're even during the pandemic, I was helping out a nonprofit housing organization, and I'd ask them, okay, how's everybody doing? And they would start, yep, okay, at this house at 225, and like I literally went, time out, time out, time out, time out, time out. I don't give a crap about the house or what's going on with it, or it has a leaky roof or the foundation needs to be repaired. Don't care. That doesn't matter to me right now. Is it important? Yes. Doesn't matter to me right now. I ask you, how are you doing? We're in the middle of this thing that's killing a bunch of people, and we can't go do things because everything's closed off. How are you doing? How are you navigating it? What challenges you're facing? I want everybody to kind of share ideas. And what happened is it turned into, well, I know this shop here that still allows you to go in and get this and this, which all of a sudden probably cleared out their inventory because they all told each other, and they probably told their friends and family. So that store was like, we have no inventory. We had a run on it. But again, it was just, how are you doing? And not, I don't,
Sure.
the house will take care of it. Don't worry. We'll get that. That's just a thing. We'll get that.
Mhm.
Just make sure it doesn't collapse on anybody. We don't need that. But just, how are you? And it changed the temperature on things to the point where people felt a little bit more at ease. They're like, okay, I'm going through this scary time, but I know that this organization cares for me and wants me to do whatever I need to do to take care of what I need to take care of. And everything else will sort itself out. And it did. And,
Mhm.
but again, I think having that type of environment, and I know many leaders may not have that mindset because they were brought up or learned the, performance metrics. Here's this, and this. And they forget that they're working with human beings and not just widgets and devices. And even with AI, okay, AI is only good as the instructions you give. And if you're a leader and you don't give good direction, don't expect AI to be able to decipher your bad instructions either. It may, but don't bet on it. So there's a lot of, what I'm trying to get to is there's a lot of internal conversations we need to have with ourselves as well to kind of figure out who we are and how we present and how we show up. And is that beneficial to others or is it detrimental to others?
Mhm.
And I think that's an important conversation for a lot of people to have.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you're pointing to a number of different things about sort of just what goes on inside of leaders. And what we hear in our Coaching in the Moment workshop, which is just a one-day workshop that basically teaches people how to wire up a coaching-based approach to everyday conversations, we see incredible relief on the faces of many of our participants when they discover that they don't have to give up that need to, direct and, incorrect things. But what we highlight is that managing people requires a very different approach. And it requires the kind of approach you're talking about of listening, appreciating how they see the world, helping them learn from their everyday challenges. And the artistry of leadership is not one or the other, but the balance of both and the ability to move, depending on what the situation is between these two ways of thinking. And those are super powerful, very well resourced leaders who can do that. And it's a skill. It's just a skill that we haven't really valued, and it can be learned in a day and then needs to be reinforced. And it just can change the entire culture of an organization. In fact, that's how we often work, is to wire up Untying the Knot as a way of shaping the entire culture of the organization. Because the tricky thing that can happen is if one person goes out and learns these skills, but nobody else does, they feel really odd. And often the system will kind of work to try to shut that new person down. So if you really want transformational change, you want to wire up a shared language that helps us talk about the things that matter the most. And that's what I created Untying the Knot to do, basically be a shared language that allows people to talk about the things that matter most and that means business, and people. And increasingly, those two things are completely intertwined.
And critically important for the success of business, not only today, but down the road as well. So, Diane, I've loved this conversation. Where can people find out more about you and this amazing work you're doing?
Thank you. Yeah, they can LinkedIn Dianna, Dianna Anderson with a SON at Cylient, Cylient.com. Or I am really interested right now in looking and working with companies that are interested in doing what I just described, wiring up a shared language that really can facilitate change. So if you have a company like that and you're interested in talking, reach out to me directly at Dianna at Cylient.com.
And I'll definitely have that in the show notes. And I highly encourage every organization listening to take you up on that because, my opinion, they all need it. Even if they're doing things well, they could still improve and grow. And learning how to do that's just going to make them a healthier organization. And we as a society want that and deserve that. So thank you so much again for your time. Really loved our conversation today.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Michael.
Thanks for listening to the Breakfast Leadership Show, part of the Breakfast Leadership Network. Visit breakfastleadership.com for tips on empowering your business and your life.